So here I have an empty Houdini, and we are going to start by creating our hero pumpkin shape. Okay, let's press tab and type geometry. We're going to start with an empty geometry container. I'm going to double click and rename this Halloween. Okay, let's double click to jump inside, press tab, type sphere. And by default, we will get this sphere, which is mostly quads. I'm going to change this to polygon, which will give us triangles that are going to be easier to manage in terms of resolution, and they are going to be lighter on the viewport. I'm going to set the frequency to 128. So let's take a look at some references and identify some of the shapes that would make this look like a pumpkin. We can go on Google and just type Halloween pumpkin, and you can see that one of the features that really stands out are these cuts that could be more random and noised up like here, or they could be evenly spaced with some distortion. They could be also bulged out a little bit like in these more cartoony references. So we will explore some approaches how we can go about this. And then the other thing is the top and the bottom are a little bit squashed, especially in the area where the stem is. So we will have to integrate that into our procedural system. Okay, so let's get back to Houdini. And we will start with the cuts. So one of the very easy ways how we can create procedural line cuts on top of the sphere would be using some noise. So we will be using the noise based on the UVs. So let's create a UV attribute. So I'm going to create press tab, type UV texture. So with this UV texture, we will set the texture type to polar, and then we will change the attribute class to point, because we want the UVs to be on points, since the noise would be utilizing the UV attribute from the points. We can scale the X direction a little bit to make the UVs a bit more uniform, like that. And then after this, I'm going to put down mountain node. So mountain. And let's connect the UVs to the mountain, put a display flag onto the mountain. So you can see we get this rock-like shape. I'm going to turn off the UV in the viewport. And with some quick adjustments, we can make this look like cuts that we would see on a pumpkin. So first thing first, I want to change the location attribute from position. I want to change this to UV. So let's click on this drop down and use UV. And then in the element, we can actually set the element per axis. So if you click on XYZ here, you would have access to these components. And then we can adjust them by stretching out the Y direction. So I'm going to increase this 25 times, and you can already see we get something interesting here. And then the overall element size we're going to make smaller, so something like 0.15. Okay, and then we also want to reduce the noise amplitude. So I'm going to set the amplitude to something 0.05. So this looks interesting, but this doesn't really give us that organic bulged out pumpkin cuts. I'm going to change the noise type from simplex to Worley cellular. And then with the Worley cellular, if you invert the noise direction, if you go to enable remap ramp and then just click on this reverse domain, you would get something like that. Now you can see we get something much more like pumpkin cuts. The next thing that we would need to integrate is the actual indents from top and the bottom. And then we can create that quite easily if we just create a line that would have points on top and on the bottom. So let's create a line, press tab, line. Okay, we need this line to basically fit inside of the pumpkin shape. So let's template the mountain. Let's create a match size to fit it inside. So match size, and we want the pumpkin to be the reference and then the line to be matched to it, and then we can also turn on scale to fit. So if I enable the points, you can see we have 1 point on top and we have 1 point on the bottom. And the way we are going to make the pumpkin distorted by this line is we're going to create a mask attribute around each of the points on top and on the bottom. Then we're going to squash the pumpkin, and then we're going to blend the squashed and original shape based on that mask. So let's create mask from geometry, and this is a very useful node. It works pretty much like attribute transfer. So we are going to every time I create mask from geometry, I change the reference to points because it's faster to operate on points. And we basically want to connect the reference geometry, which is going to be our line, into the second input, and we want to let's put it here, and we want to connect the actual pumpkin in the first input. So now if I display the mask from geometry, I'm going to turn off the template. So we are not going to see the mask right away, but if I go to the output mask tab and then click on this toggle, you would see that we have red around each point on this line. So let's see what values we can use to make this tighter. So I'm going to reduce the radius to 0.425. Okay, something like that. And then we can now call this mask squash mask. And then let's add a transform. So once again, we are going to squash the pumpkin overall. So with the transform, I'm just going to scale it down in the y-axis to a value of something like 6 to 5. But keep, you can squash it more if you want. And then we are going to use blend shapes. So the blend shapes node would give us a blend between the original shape and the squashed shape. And right now we don't see anything because the blend doesn't know that there is a mask. But if I use the blend masking here, so if we change this from set from attribute, you can see it's looking for a mask, but we actually renamed it into a squash mask, right? So we just need to click on the drop down and choose the squash mask. And actually we have to remove the mask. So now you can see we got our pumpkin shape. So this is one way how we can create this quite easily. And then obviously if you want the cuts to be deeper, we can let's go to the smooth shaded view. You can see the cuts are now pretty light. We can use another mask. We can create a mask by ambient occlusion, so it will capture some interesting details. So let's put a display flag here, so you can see it basically captures every part of the pumpkin, but the cuts, we are actually going to invert it, and then we're going to push those areas more. So let's turn on remap ambient occlusion mask, and then the ramp is going to be it will need to be inverted. So let's invert the ramp here, reverse the main, and then I want to get it tighter. So if you click on this arrow, you would see the numbers here, and then we can also show controls so we can see the exact position. So I'm going to move it somewhere to 0.75 in position, so we get sharper edges. And then by using this mask, we can just keep it as mask here, and then let's use peak. So in Houdini 21, the peak node actually now can take the mask as an input, which is quite handy. So in here, we're going to use scale by attribute, and then in the peak node, let's put a display flag here. I'm going to set the distance to minus 0.01, just a little bit, just to push it in a little bit tighter. And then let's turn off the mask visualization. So you can see this is without peak and this is with the peak. So we got quite an interesting shape. Don't worry about these rough shapes. We're going to smooth everything and distort it later on. But as far as the general shape goes, this is the workflow, and you can get a lot of cool variations if you just offset the noise, you know, and if you play with frequency. So this is one way of creating a pumpkin shape. The other way is a little bit more parametric. So we can keep using the same sphere with the same resolution. So let's put a display flag here. So let's say this is our one way, and then in here I'm going to show you the other way. So I'm going to create another sphere. So press tab, type sphere. So the idea is that this second sphere, if you look at it, and if I enable the wireframe, it's going to have only the columns, which we will randomly delete. So we get an even number of these, and then we will use them to push and generate the cuts. So in the connectivity, we can change this to columns, and you can see we got just the cage. And then basically we want to use a high number of rows to make the sides smoother. So let's use 256. And then for the columns, I'm going to use something like 20. Okay, so basically here, maybe even we can do 15. There are two ways to do this. The simplest way is to use labs random selection. So we're just going to press tab and type labs random selection. Okay, so in here we can delete the percentage. So if we start increasing the percentage, right now it is choosing the points, but if we change the element to primitives, you can see that it's selecting the primitives. And then obviously if you choose delete selected, you'll end up with this. So let's say I want to delete 50%. I'm gonna put it to something like 0.5, and we can also play with the random seed. Let's say the value I have is 36. So let's say we have something like that, and then we can use copy and transform. Okay, so we are going to create 2 copies here. Maybe actually let's create 3 copies, and then we will rotate this, let's say 100. Let's see how many degrees we want to copy. You can basically gauge by the pattern. So if we set to 114 degrees, so something like this, which is quite random. So now we have this cage that can be used to generate cuts. And the way we are going to generate the cuts is going to be, again, using the mask from geometry. So mask from geometry. We want to set it to points. So the cuts would go to cut shape will go to the second input. The actual pumpkin sphere is in the first input. And then in here we can turn on the mask, and don't forget to turn it on in the viewport as well. So let's make sure it's on. Okay, so you can see the mask is quite, the radius of the mask is quite big, and we are going to reduce it. So I'm going to set the radius to a smaller value, 0.01. Okay, and I want the curve to actually be linear, so we can easily just click on the gear and use linear in here. And for some reason it inverted it, so let's invert it back so it looks like that. Okay, and we can call this mask something like cut mask, and let's see what values we can use to peak it in. Let's turn it on again. So I'm gonna put down peak, press tab, type peak, and in this peak node we are going to utilize the scale by attribute. Mask attribute is called cut mask, and then the distance is going to be very small, something like 0.001. Okay, so let's turn off the mask. I just want to see. Okay, so something like that I think is good. Maybe we can do a bit higher. Maybe 0.005, something like this. Okay, you can do it more or less. So then after that, we are going to additionally bulge out these areas. And we can do it with another mask. So we can have better control. So let's put down another mask geometry, and we are going to put it here, and let's make sure it's set to points. Our cuts are the same, but this time I'm going to call this mask bulge mask, and we are going to set the radius smaller. Let's actually preview this. Let's turn the display here and here. Okay, so we are going to adjust it a little bit. First of all, I want to invert it, and then we want to change the type of the curve to be much smoother. So if I click on this curve, I can change the type to B-spline, and then I can easily do something like that. So we get a much smoother curve. So the radius is still pretty big. I'm going to set it to 0.1, something more like that. And then for the actual cuts, we can adjust the ends. So this one I'm going to set to 0.1, and then this one is going to be somewhere around 0.05, for example. Okay, so we have cleaner mask, and then we are going to use this to bulge out this area. So again, we're going to use another peak, and we are going to use scale by attribute, bulge mask, and we are going to increase the distance to 0.01. And let's put a display flag here. So now if I turn off the mask, you can see that we got this looking almost like a basketball, but it's going to look like a pumpkin after we squash the top and the bottom. But this will give us much more randomized cuts. And let's turn off the smooth shaded. Actually turn, yeah. So I think the cuts are a little bit too strong, so I'm actually gonna go down 0.001. Yeah, something more like this, because we will increase this with ambient occlusion later on. And the actual bulging, the actual squashing is going to be done exactly with the same technique. So we can use the mask from geometry, transform, and blend shape. So I'm just going to select these three nodes. I'm going to hold Alt, click and drag them here. And we're just going to reconnect this to be our source. And oops, let's go back, Control Z. So let's put it after the peak, and let's see. Okay, there we go. So again, if you want this to be smoother, you can adjust the radius here, you know, It's pretty flexible, and you can squash it more or less. It's fully procedural. So after we did this, now we can also use mask by ambient occlusion with maybe a little bit of tighter radius this time. So we're gonna do mask by ambient occlusion, and let's see what are the values here. So I'm going to remap the ambient occlusion. Let's select the node. Let's put the display flag. Let's visualize the mask attribute, and let's again turn it on in the viewport. Okay, so that's our mask. I'm going to invert it like this, and we can use some. We can make the ramp a little bit more contrasty, somewhere around that, and 0.85 in this area, something like that. Okay, so we got a mask, and now we're just going to peak it a little bit more. This is just called mask, so let's use a peak node. And we are going to adjust this by attribute mask, and then the values I used were minus 0.025. Okay, there we go. So this way you can get stronger cuts if you like, right? I think maybe this is a little bit too strong. Maybe we can do 0.1. Now for the final look, so if we take a look at this one, let me put it here, you can see that this specific shape of cuts was achieved by using slightly different numbers that I showed here. Again, this is just for you to experiment. Maybe you want to create your own custom pumpkin. But if you want to achieve exactly those cuts that I have, let's see what numbers I used for that. So I started with actually a lower resolution sphere. So let's create a sphere. And again, we're going to set this to polygon. I'm going to set the frequency to 32. Okay, and then for the cuts sphere, let's duplicate this one. Actually, let's put a display flag on this. Okay, so we have 32 divisions. This one is going to be polygon mesh, and it will have around 20 columns and 256 in rows, so pretty similar. I used a slightly different grouping technique here, so I did group by range, which is basically very similar to the random selection in labs. You can select, for example, this one. Let me see. Again, this one. Yeah, so we want to change actually the sphere to columns as well. And then in the group by range, we're going to select 2 out of 3. And then I have an offset of 1. Okay. Then this group 1 will be blasted. So let's press blast, and then I'm going to choose the group 1 in here. So now you can see we deleted those polygons, and then I used copy node, copy and transform. So we have 2 copies, and they were rotated exactly by 22.5 degrees. Okay. So after that, we use our trusty mask from geometry. And I'm just going to give you exact numbers. And again, we have to set this to points. Connect the second input here. Let's preview our mask and make sure it's visible in the viewport. Okay, so 0.015. Make sure this is linear, type linear. So linear, and make sure it's going like that. Okay, so then for the peak, it was slightly higher amount, so minus 0.025. So with the lower resolution sphere, and again, you can see without the mask attribute, it just shrinks everything. So if I set this to scale by attribute mask, now we get these cuts. So you can see that with the lower resolution, we get smoother cuts, and then we will add the bulging as well. So let's use mask from geometry. Okay, and let's peak. All right, so in this one, in this mask from geometry, again, we have to set this to points. We have to set a bit higher radius, 0.22. I'm going to invert this. I'm going to set this to B-spline, make it more like that. Again, so these values are quite similar. But because of the lower resolution of the initial sphere, we're going to get much smoother bulges. So I'm going to set the mask to be using the attribute, and then I'm going to bulge it out by 0.025. So you can see we got a bit bigger bulging. Now the distortion, the squashiness is going to be exactly the same. So it's going to be this one. Okay, so we have it squashed like that. And then after this, I subdivided it so we can get more polygons. So subdivide. Because the order of operations can sometimes change the result quite a bit. And you can see we get this polygonal topology, which is not ideal. So if you change this to open subdiv loop, you'll get triangles. Okay, so we got this. And then obviously there was used the mask from ambient occlusion with slightly different values. So mask from ambient mask by ambient occlusion, and we are going to remap the occlusion. We are going to invert it, and the values are actually like that. So 32 on this side and 71 on this side, roughly. And then we are going to peak it in. So peak, and we are going to use by attribute, and then minus 0.025. And I think that did it just a little bit. I think that was it. Oh, and also here I think I used a smaller sampling, but that doesn't really make a huge difference. So you can kind of see the difference of this pumpkin, right, and this one. This one has a bit more rigid shape and stronger cuts. Maybe this is just too much actually. But this one is a little bit closer to how the pumpkins look in real world, right? If you look at these pumpkins, they have some of them actually have very sharp looking cuts. So if you want to create a pumpkin that is more sharp like that or like this, definitely the first technique would be ideal. Second one would be a little bit more bulgy and a little bit more stylized. All right, so we looked at pretty much almost 3 ways of how you can create different shapes of procedural pumpkins. And then in the next part, we will take this basic shape and we will carve out the eyes, nose, and mouth details based on black and white image. All right, I'll see you in the next part.